Hello YouTube and welcome back to another edition of Guitar Shed Videos. Duncan Ryan coming to you once again. And today what I actually want to talk about is the best ways to get, or the best places really, to get used guitar gear online. And the reason this topic is, I think, so important is that, any guitarist who's ever operated on a budget of any kind, most of us, let's face it, start out when we're, teenagers or in our early 20s. And you have to operate within a budget, but a lot of times doing that, if you're going to buy new gear exclusively, will just kill you in terms of what you're able to afford. Because, if you buy used gear, a lot of times you can get it for half the price or less of what the gear would have been, initially in terms of cost. So, I think it's really important that everyone kind of learn to utilize, the best sources of used guitar gear, because it really improves what you can add to your own rig and your own musical arsenal, as opposed to just, buying all new gear all the time and only being able to get, a very limited range of gear. So without any further ado, let's jump into this. I do want to point out that this is only my own personal opinion with regards to the 5 sources that I'm about to list, and we're going to go from, while these are my top 5 sources, we're still going to go from what I consider to be the worst one to the best one, so in ascending order. Number 5, and I realize this isn't exclusively an online thing, but it still falls into this category in my opinion, Craigslist. Now, Craigslist is a really good source because it allows you to find just about anything that would be available locally to you. In other words, anything available in your town, chances are if someone's trying to sell a piece of musical equipment, they're going to list it on Craigslist first. And that gives you a wide range of different things that you can get, because people in different genres of music or people with different, types of gear are all going to list it on the same platform, which makes it really, really a great source for musical equipment, but it has a lot of downsides to it. Number 1, you're looking almost exclusively at local deals. You're not going to wind up finding a lot of people on Craigslist who are willing to ship very far. So you're looking, unless you're looking at, a really expensive piece of vintage gear or, some really high-end piece of equipment, you're pretty much going to be looking locally. So you're a little bit limited by that. The other thing is you don't have a whole lot of buyer protection. You're dealing exclusively with another individual. You're an individual buying from an individual, and Craigslist is essentially nothing more than an online listing site. It doesn't really have any structure that allows you to file a complaint or anything like that in the event that, you happen to buy something that's not as described. So you really have to do your homework on the piece you're buying before you do. The best way to do that is, ask the seller if you're interested in a specific piece of gear. Ask the seller if you can try it out, before taking possession of it. But even then, you wind up with a certain amount of risk, because there may be a problem with the piece of gear that you don't notice initially in, a basic playthrough that becomes very apparent later when you're trying to utilize it more to its fullest extent. So, while it's a good source of gear, you wind up with a very, very risky proposition in terms of the fact that there's no buyer protection. Now, this is offset a little bit by the fact that musicians, in general, we don't like to rip one another off. If it's someone who's in the local musicians community, that person isn't really going to try to rip you off, generally speaking, because it will really hurt their reputation in the future. But if it's just some random person who's selling a guitar because they don't like playing guitar, or because, they have found that they have no particular talent for it, or whatever the case may be, that person isn't really all that concerned about their reputation in the local music scene, and so they're not going to be worried about ripping you off. So it's a very risky proposition in terms of buying compared to the rest of the websites I'm about to list off. So that's Craigslist. Check it out. Still a really great chance for you to pick up some gear, and the pricing tends to be fairly decent because the people who are listing on Craigslist, as a general rule, are catering only to a local audience. So while your opportunity to buy gear is lessened a little bit by the fact it's only local, their pricing is lessened a little bit by that same fact, because they have to find someone locally, which means they have a smaller audience to appeal to with their piece of gear. So they have to put a price out there that's actually going to move it without, trying to scour the internet for that one buyer who might be willing to pay a much higher price for it. So number 4, the next potential candidate is eBay. Now, eBay is a little bit better than Craigslist for a few different reasons. One, going back to the buyer protection factor, while eBay you're still dealing with an individual, the platform and the infrastructure is set up in such a way that you actually can file a claim with eBay, and that person is actually going to be bound by certain terms and conditions to, if you get a piece of gear that is not as described or has a severe problem with it, they're actually going to be bound by the terms and conditions of eBay to actually recompense you and accept a return of the gear. So that gives you a lot more protection than you would have, say, outside of a platform like that on, say, a listing site like Craigslist. But by the same token, you're still dealing with individuals, and that's where eBay starts to break down. People who are listing on eBay, a lot of them have a very inflated sense of what their gear is actually worth. Now, a lot of people, don't get me wrong, a lot of people who list on eBay are still asking reasonable prices for their gear, but with the ability to cater to the entire online community, people wind up thinking they can get a lot more for their gear than it's really worth, and sometimes there's that one piece of gear you really, really want, that one pedal or that one amplifier or that one guitar that's going to really make your rig in your mind, and you find it on eBay, and the person who is trying to sell it is asking way, way more than it's worth. Maybe not even more than you're willing to pay, because, what you're willing to pay could be under what it's worth sometimes as well, but you have the problem of, if that person has a sense that it's worth twice what it's really worth at market value, you do wind up with that problem quite a lot. And this is something that varies a lot depending on the piece of gear they're selling and the market in which they're selling it. But as a general rule, musical gear is a buyer's market. There are a lot of buyers, and you kind of have to be able to satisfy the people who are most likely to buy it and work out a price that's reasonable for both buyer and seller. Now, granted, there are some exclusions to this. For example, if you have a 1959 Gibson Les Paul you're trying to unload, you can pretty much dictate terms and get whatever you want for it. Someone's going to pay it. But, outside of rare exceptions like that, special pieces of vintage gear, very limited edition pieces of gear, that sort of thing, it's a balance between buyer and seller where most people are going to want to work to find a price that's going to work for both, but some people just have an inflated sense of what their gear's worth because they paid a lot for it, new, and don't really understand the depreciation factor that occurs with musical instruments. So there is always that problem to consider. Now, you may not run into a whole lot of that, but by the same token, it does exist, especially on platforms like eBay, and that's where you wind up with pricing inconsistency because different individuals will offer the same piece of gear at different prices very commonly. You also wind up with a really big problem, in my opinion, when it comes to focused searching. So, let me give you an example. If I go on eBay and I search Gibson Les Paul, I'm going to find some Gibson Les Pauls, some authentic Gibson Les Pauls. I'm also going to find a lot of garbage I don't want. I'm going to find, basic parts for Gibson Les Pauls, necks, pickups, all sorts of different things, and I'm not really wanting any of that because I'm looking for the guitar. Now, if I already have the guitar and I'm looking for parts, that's great, but if I don't have the guitar, I don't really care about the parts because I don't have anything I can use them on. So there is that problem. There's also going to be things like Gibson Les Paul copy guitars you're going to have to deal with. Advertisements for Gibson Les Pauls. Shirts with Gibson Les Pauls on them. I've even seen people put up postcards for sale with Gibson Les Pauls on them. This means that a single search term, which you may want to yield you only the piece of gear, the exact piece of gear that you're searching for, can sometimes yield you hundreds, if not thousands, of unrelated or only vaguely related individual pieces that are for sale that you don't want anything to do with. So it becomes a very unfocused search, and you sometimes have to pour through a lot of garbage to really find what you want. So I think that's a problem, although, by refining your searches and using the filters of, say, new or used gear or, going highest price to lowest price, you can eliminate a lot of that crap because, let's say someone's offering, a knob for a Gibson Les Paul and they're asking $299 for it. You can eliminate that by going ahead and setting your search to say price plus shipping, highest to lowest they allow you to do. So you can eliminate a lot of that garbage, but you're still going to have a lot you have to pour through to get just the results that you want. So that's kind of eBay for you. So better than Craigslist because of the buyer protection and also the sheer number of listings. You're going to find people from all over the world listing their pieces of musical gear online for you. So the selection is huge. That's another huge advantage to eBay, is how much larger a selection they have than, say, something like Craigslist, where you're refined to a local search only. So number 3 is a little bit like eBay, but more focused, and that's called Reverb.com. Reverb.com is a really cool website. It's like eBay, except only for musical instruments. You're only going to find musical instruments and accessories to musical instruments there. So, guitars, it's mostly guitar focused. Of course, you will find bass guitars and, drum kits and that sort of thing on there as well. But it's mostly focused to guitars and guitar accessories, amplifiers and such. So it's a really, really great website. Now, you run into some of the same problems you have with eBay. Again, there is a platform for buyer protection, so you're not entirely just hanging out there in the wind if, you get ripped off. There is a platform for buyer protection, but again, you're dealing with individuals, and that also causes the same problems in price inconsistency that you would experience with eBay. And, Reverb.com is also a little bit narrower market share, so you don't have, say maybe the selection you would have on eBay, but I think how focused it is. You're not having to pour through, say, electronics listings, a bunch of stuff you don't care about. You're not going to find the, Gibson Les Paul postcards on there if you search for a Gibson Les Paul. It's a lot more focused to being just used musical gear offered by individuals through that platform. It's essentially a more focused version of eBay. So it's a really great site. I would encourage you to check it out. You can find a lot of stuff on there that's not available anywhere else. And, it's a really cool website, so I would encourage you to check it out. A lot of people haven't really either heard of it or they've heard of it very peripherally but have never really gone on there in order to take a look at what's really available. So I would really say it's worth a look. Even if you don't buy anything off of it, it's very, very much so worth looking into, and you can find it by just Googling, Reverb.com, and that'll be the first listing. So number 2, and this is the one that most people are going to say probably would have been my number 1 pick, and this was a very narrow pick between number 2 and number 1, and I'll get to why in a minute. Number 2 would be Guitar Center Used. Guitar Center Used is probably the most comprehensively used database of used gear there is. It offers you every piece of used gear from every bricks and mortar Guitar Center store there is. So anytime a store, let's say a store in Alaska, buys a guitar in, a few days later it's listed on the website so that you can actually buy. You can be living in Maine, you can be living in any state, anywhere, and you can purchase that piece of gear that store in Alaska bought in. It gives you a huge selection. And the pricing starts getting a lot more consistent at this point, because Guitar Center, like any major corporation that buys in any sort of used gear, has a very structured way that they make offers on used gear and how they price it. So you're eliminating at this point the pricing consistency altogether. The pricing model is very, very similar, and there's going to be some adjusting for condition, age, whether it's vintage or not, all that sort of stuff. But, for the most part, their pricing model is very consistent. So if you go online to Guitar Center's used website, which is actually, it's a portion of their main website, it's not a separate site, of course. But if you go online to their used database and you look up, say, Black Star amplifiers, and you're looking specifically for a used HT100, you're going to find that for the most part, they're all within, say, about $100 range of one another, the different individual amplifiers that are offered. So you're not getting that wild pricing inconsistency where people, where say maybe one individual has this very inflated sense of what his piece of gear is worth. You're not getting that with Guitar Center Used, because they're not willing to pay. If that person comes into a Guitar Center store and tries to get that price for it, they're just not going to take it. They're not going to buy it in. So you wind up with a much more consistent pricing model, which is a huge advantage. You're also now getting into the point where you're dealing with a company rather than an individual person. You get a lot more buyer protection with this. You actually get I believe it's a 30-day guarantee you get with it, where you can return your piece of gear at any time for any reason during that 30-day span of time. You can also buy extended protection on them. It does cost, in my opinion, maybe a little bit more extra to buy that protection than they really should charge. But, that's their pricing model. That's the way it always has been. So it's not as if there's anything unexpected there. Now, Guitar Center Used still has a couple of little problems, and this is actually what pushed it down for me from number 1 to number 2 in this list. A lot of times there are listing inconsistencies, and what I mean by that is a piece of gear will be listed under, say, a certain condition or have details about it that when you actually contact the store, and this is something I do anytime I'm buying online from Guitar Center Used, I contact the store directly before I make any moves toward purchasing it, because you can purchase it without directly contacting the store, and that's always a bad idea because you never know for sure what you're getting until you've exchanged a couple of emails with a sales associate at the store and gotten some better details on it. So there have been several times when there's been, say, a piece of gear I've been interested in, and I've contacted the store, and I found out that what's actually listed on their website, say the condition rating or some of the details about it in the description of the piece of gear, are either highly exaggerated or wildly inaccurate in some cases. To give a couple of examples, at one time there was a vintage Framus acoustic guitar that I was very interested in. I believe the list price on it was maybe $400, something along those lines, which was, very reasonable for that guitar, I'll admit. So I contacted the store at the time and asked them, how the condition was, and I will point out that the condition listing on the website was listed under great, which is, it's in really good condition, no severe cosmetic issues, no functional issues whatsoever. Waited a couple of days and I got a reply by email from the store's sales associate who was dealing with the used gear at the time. I come to find out that piece of gear, that used Framus acoustic guitar, actually had a massive crack down the back side of the guitar, and that it was virtually unplayable, that it was a collector piece only, and I exchanged a couple of more emails with this guy, and I asked him, have other people been inquiring about this? Have you seen a lot of interest in it? And, he had said that a few more people had emailed him, because this piece of gear had been listed up for some months, and the fact of it is that despite all of these inquiries, and despite the fact they had, returned all of this information, they returned it to me very accurately. They didn't try to bullshit me and say, yeah, it's in great shape, and then try and sell it to me, and then only then I would find out when I received it that there were so many problems with it. They were very upfront with me about that, but they didn't, go to the trouble of changing that listing on the website. So had I in fact purchased that piece of gear without doing my homework in the way I had done, I would have really gotten screwed over on it, because, I would have received that guitar and I would have found that it had a huge crack down the back of the body, which I would not have been in any way satisfied with, certainly. Another example of this is before I really got into the habit of purchasing gear based on exchanging emails with the sales associates at the store. I had another similar situation when I was searching out my Marshall Mode 4 amplifier head, which is one of my amplifier heads of choice. I really like it, and I did eventually get a very nice one for a reasonable price, but this was during my initial attempts to acquire one. And I found one for what seemed a very reasonable price compared to some of the other Marshall Mode 4 heads, but it was still in the price range of it should be functional and everything should be fine. And I actually purchased it. This was, again, before I got into the habit of exchanging emails directly with the sales associates before I'd make any move to purchase it. And fortunately, someone actually caught this mistake before they shipped it to me, so I didn't have to go to all the hassle of shipping it back. But I got an email a few days later from the store I had purchased it from. I believe it was somewhere in Wisconsin, but I don't remember for sure. But the crux of the matter was that what had happened was they had had two Marshall Mode 4 heads in stock. And they had sold one under this list price, and they had assigned the same list price to the other one, which was all well and good, except that it turned out that other one was completely non-functional and was supposed to be sold only as a parts amplifier. Had that mistake not been caught by someone who was, very diligent at that store, and I'm very grateful to whoever that was who caught that mistake, I would have actually wound up with a parts-only amplifier, and I would have been stuck returning it and having to go through all that hassle. So, and I'm not going to lie, Guitar Center's customer service did an excellent job of handling that with me, and they actually tracked down another Marshall Mode 4, which ended up being the one I eventually purchased, and offered it to me at a discounted rate for my trouble. So I'm not going to lie, their customer service is excellent when a mistake like that is made, but I've seen a few too many examples of that kind of error being made. So, I'm not really 100% satisfied with the way they list and the fact that they don't make alterations when mistakes have been made that apparently is common knowledge at the store. So, while it's a great used gear program and it offers you the widest selection you can possibly get, there are still a few bugs that need to be worked out, and that's what made it number 2 on this list, although it lost out to number 1 only by a hair. Number 1, and this is a site a lot of you have probably not heard of, and I only discovered it relatively recently, is musicgoround.com. To give you a little bit of background, what it is, it's actually a conglomeration of independently owned stores under the parent company Music Go Round, which is based in Kenosha, Wisconsin. What they are is they are a combination store. They do offer some new gear, I should say, but they focus almost specifically on used gear. They are a specialty used gear dealer. That's most of their business. When you go to their website, that's 99% of what's offered is used guitar gear. And that really makes them a great website for someone who's trying to find exclusively used gear, because they are specialists in it. They also have a pricing model which I think is preferable even to Guitar Center's. As a general rule, I find that their prices tend to be a little bit lower than Guitar Center's, and rather than having those inconsistencies that I mentioned with the Guitar Center used program, you actually, in order to purchase it, you are given an immediate option to send an email to the store during the purchasing process to get specific details, to get any sort of better information about the piece of gear. It's very much encouraged on their website for you to have a dialogue with one of their sales representatives about that piece of gear, and they're always very upfront with you about what it is, and I've never found any inconsistencies in the way anything is described. And they also offer, I think, a better selection in some ways than Guitar Center will, because they'll buy in some things that Guitar Center, as a general rule, won't do. For example, 2 big examples that will save you a lot of money: cases and aftermarket pickups. Most of the time with Guitar Center or other major corporations like that, you cannot find these items used, or if you do, they're very rare to find used. On Music Go Round, they have all sorts of cases offered, all sorts of used pickups offered, very lightly used pickups, and they're always in good condition. And you can save yourself a ton of money in, say, getting a good case for your guitar. Even at the same time as you're buying a used guitar, you can buy a used case for it and save yourself a lot of money in the process if it doesn't already come with a case. And you can even buy aftermarket pickups at a significant discount over what they would be new. A lot of things like that. So it's a really great used gear program, and I've found their customer service to be absolutely second to none. Now, I know I'm giving them a really rave review, so I would like to point out that I'm in no way affiliated with Music Go Round. They haven't, paid for my endorsement or any ridiculous nonsense like that. I've just been really satisfied with what I've purchased from them, and I found them to be a really great used gear program. So that's kind of my top 5 picks for the best used gear online websites. Now, of course, there are hundreds, probably thousands of sites I haven't even mentioned or touched on. And there's always the physical buying option of, going to your local mom and pop music stores and all that sort of thing and finding those pieces of gear that they've bought in. A lot of times you'll find stores that don't even really have a website, and you have to go to those stores physically in order to see what they've got. But as far as buying used gear online, these are my top 5 picks. Now, I'd be really interested in seeing what you guys like. Down in the comments section, if there's a site I haven't touched on that you really like, or maybe a program that you're really fond of that I haven't mentioned, go ahead down to the comments section and tell me what you guys like, because I'd love to see the used gear sites that you guys prefer. And, if I get enough comments on that vein, I'll actually do a second video using exclusively the sites that I am sent, links to or, mentions of in the comments to this video, as kind of a, a viewer popularity contest on what everyone likes best in terms of their used gear buying websites. As usual, I'd like to mention that the Guitar Shed website is also accessible down in a link below in the video description, as is the Guitar Shed Facebook page, where you can get updates on all the projects that are going on, new videos coming out, new articles coming out on the blog, etc., etc., etc. Other than that, not a whole lot to say. I am trying to ramp up video production at this point, trying to get up to about 2 videos a week. We'll see how that goes, see if I can continue to do it with my busy schedule. If you guys have any videos you want to see, questions, comments, anything, please feel free to get in touch. I always love hearing from you guys. Keep in mind, this channel is always more for you guys than it is for me, and I love to hear what you all have to say. So, have a great day, enjoy your playing, and I'll see you next time. Bye.